read in the Bible where there was a famine and you didn't know if you were going to get crops this year. Now what happens if you don't have crops for the entire year? You know, that's a big deal. You've got to deal with that kind of stuff. So one of the other things that you would do as a mature member, as a grown-up, if you will, is you would have to save for the unforeseen. Because these events happened, you would make sure that you would prepare for them. That was part of being an adult, was to stockpile those things, to learn how to make do with what you have and to stretch what you. This is why grandmothers were always canning stuff, right? I don't know if you ever had you went to a grandmother's house and she had all the aluminum foil folded in a drawer. You know, oh no, we can use that, right? Christmas is always interesting. No, don't throw that bowl away. We can use that. Well, that's because she grew up in the Depression, you know. And really what those folks did was, I mean, it was amazing. The kid would go get a paper route or sell newspapers on the corner, and he'd bring his 25 cents home and he'd put it on the table for the family. It wasn't, nowadays this is mine, I earned this. Oh, but Mom, did you pay my cell phone bill? You know, this is so you can see the disconnect, right? So there was a difference back in those days where you can start to see where kind of the shame that people would impose upon others would be projected because it meant something. They recognized that if you hurt the community, that's exactly what you're doing. Everybody else is taking a hit for the sin that you have instigated. So to be an upstanding member of society, then, is a person who seeks stability, prepares for the future, and at least recognizes that he is one of a larger body and there is a responsibility to that larger body. Okay? Then we got a shift. What happened was we got really, really successful. Post-World War II, you had a huge baby boom, right? 1946 to 1964, baby boomers. And industry was up, jobs were up, Americans had the highest standard of living in the world, and the baby boomers started having kids. And when they raised their kids grew into a world where stability was a given. Nobody worried about having 3 meals a day. The idea of the unforeseen was less and less thinkable. Modern science came in and started, polio, for example, was cured through the polio vaccine, more or less. The inherent nature of human beings, though, is sinful. And while we can enjoy the benefits of success, it doesn't change the heart of the individual. And it will always gravitate towards opposition and rebellion against authority if authority doesn't provide you with safety, shelter, right? If the authority is just making you live by the rules, but you don't see any reason to live by the rules, now you start to rebel. In the old days, right, the children saw the parents struggle, but they also understood that because the parents had prepared, because the parents knew more than them, they survived. And then as they were adults, they would teach that to their children. In the 60s, the 70s, they kind of lost that message. It reminds me of the story in the book of Joshua, right? The first wave came in, settled the land, then they had descendants. Then there was the third descendants who did not know the Lord. And it's that 3-generational cycle. So you have the great generation, right? The World War II generation. Then you have the baby boomers. And then you have their kids and stuff. And all of a sudden, everything is ollie oxen free. So the sheer number of boomers versus the previous generation meant that instead of conforming to the previous generation standards, they could adopt their own. They could start to individualize themselves. Now, when you do this, guess what you get? See, that's a very childish way of thinking about things. I want things my way, right? And so you get a very adolescent culture, the rebellious, the challenging authority, seeking free love, right? The new truth, tune in, turn on, drop out. becomes the call sign of the 60s and things like that. And that's what we see now. G.K. Chesterton did a good job of summarizing. He wrote this beforehand. He was writing this to the intellectual elite of his day, but those intellectual leaders taught in the universities to the baby boomers who bought this stuff hook, line, and sinker. And I think Chesterton does a really good job here of encapsulating the mind of what he calls, quote, the new rebel. And he writes, "The new rebel in our time is the skeptic and will not entirely trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never be a true revolutionist. And the fact that he has no loyalty, and the fact that he can denounce anything gets in the way when he wants to denounce anything, because denunciation implies moral doctrine of some kind." This is what Chesterton's criticizing. "The modern revolutionist doubts not only the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. So he writes one book complaining that imperial oppression insults the superiority of women. And then he writes another book, another novel of which he insults himself. He cusses the Sultan because Christian girls lose their virginity, and then denounces Mrs. Grundy because they keep it. As a politician, he cries out that all war is a waste of time, and then as a philosopher, he says all life is a waste of time. A Russian pessimist will denounce a policeman for killing a peasant and prove by the highest philosophical principles that the peasant ought to have killed himself. A man denounces marriage as a lie, then denounces aristocratic profligates as treating it as a lie. He calls a flag a bauble, and then blames the oppressors of Poland and Ireland because they take away that bauble. The man of this school goes to a political meeting first, where he complains that the savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella and goes to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being the infinite skeptic, is always engaged in undermining his own mind. In his books on politics, he attacks men for trampling over morality. In his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. Therefore, the modern man in the result has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything." And I think Chesterton does a good job there of taking this to its logical conclusion. This is what happens when rebellion for the sake of rebellion. Why should we commit to those old structures? Why should we hold to those old ways? Well, why not? Maybe the fact that they're time-tested can help us understand them.